Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Raja Saroj Sahib and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, the Taliban held a parade of captured military equipment in Kandahar after US President Joe Biden defended his withdrawal decision. Biden said the withdrawal ends an era of military operations to remake other countries. The UN, meanwhile, has warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan, urging countries to provide funding following the US withdrawal. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has warned that Afghanistan could descend into another civil war if the West fails to engage with the Taliban. In an interview, Qureshi said the withdrawal was irresponsible as the West did not listen to Pakistan's concern about ending the war, but he hoped the Taliban will work towards creating an inclusive government in Afghanistan. Germany has called on Iran to resume nuclear talks with 6 world powers as soon as possible to revive a 2015 nuclear deal. In a news briefing, a foreign ministry spokesperson said that Berlin is ready to resume talks, but the window will not be open indefinitely. This comes as Iran's new foreign minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian said that Iran will not accept protraction in the negotiations. A consignment of the Russian Sputnik 5 coronavirus vaccine purchased by Pakistan has arrived in the country. This is the first Sputnik V vaccine consignment to have reached Islamabad. Meanwhile, a new coronavirus strain named Mu has been designated a variant of interest by the World Health Organization. That's all with the headlines. We will take a short break and be back with the details. Welcome back. In Afghanistan, the Taliban are preparing to stage a parade showcasing some of the military equipment that they captured after President Biden defended his pull-out decision. Biden said the U.S. faced a choice between leaving or escalating and added that the evacuation was a great success. He said the withdrawal ends an era of military operations to remake other countries. The UN, meanwhile, has warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan, urging countries to provide funding following the US withdrawal and the Taliban takeover. Though the Taliban are celebrating the withdrawal of the foreign forces, they are facing a daunting challenge to revive the crumbling economy. Also in Panjshir, the group is facing resistance from a local militia led by Ahmed Masood. A senior Taliban leader has said that the fighters have surrounded the province, calling on rebels to negotiate a settlement. For more on this, we have with us Lieutenant General retired Talib Masood. Thank you for your time. General, please tell me, President Joe Biden made a forceful defense of his decision to leave Afghanistan, telling Americans he refuses to send another generation to fight in forever war. Why did the U.S. prolong the war so long and now make an abrupt pullout?
Well, I think President Biden obviously was defending his decision to adhere to the withdrawal timelines. And he did not mention much about the chaotic disorder that accompanied it. So I think he was just trying to say that whatever the mission was of the U.S. in getting involved in Afghanistan was already fulfilled. And and I don't think he really elaborated on that mission, except to say that, it was meant to kill Osama bin Laden and that they succeeded. So I think their mission of having an inclusive government in Afghanistan, and also having a modern Afghanistan, and trying to sort of build a completely different sort of Afghanistan altogether. People, you cannot transform a country by someone else. It has to come intrinsically. It has to come through the education of the people, through their understanding of how the world functions, what are their national requirements. I think that was completely ignored. And then, of course, U.S. and the Western world sort of targeted a very selective sort of an approach, in the sense that they developed a certain class in cities. No doubt that they were able to transform them, give them good education, health facilities, and exposure to the world. But the rest of the country remained as backward as ever, or under the influence of forces like Taliban. So the Taliban had to return in that sense, and you saw what happened.
All right, General Talat, President Biden has blamed Ashraf Ghani's government for unassailable Taliban's takeover. Should the previous Afghan government be only held responsible for this defeat, or the U.S. hasty withdrawal was also the main reason?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, but the fact is that the previous Afghan government was really not a people's government, in that sense that it did not have the support, and it was relying heavily on the U.S. And external support of the Western world. So I think that has to be realized, and they did not transform, Afghanistan fundamentally. And then I think there is also a very major lesson to be learned, that you cannot have another country transform people, of another country. It has to come from within. And the leadership has to be thrown from within. You cannot impose leadership by outside forces and expect that there would be a change. So there were certain fundamental flaws in the whole approach of the Americans. And then they came out with a very ambitious plan initially, saying that, they will transform the attitude of the Afghans towards women, well, which was a good thing, but it can't come by imposing a will on them. It has to come from within, through education, through exposure to the foreign world, through understanding the benefits of education for women as to how it will really transform the generations in Afghanistan. All that was not done, and it was also, again, very selective. And then Afghanistan was a very sort of a traditional and an old society. And so that also was a great disadvantage. Then the neighborhood was also very turbulent. So there are several factors, I think, which were responsible for what all happened.
All right, now the U.S. says that the Taliban will have to earn their legitimacy and support by meeting their commitments and obligations. Do you think that the Taliban will be able to gain support of the international community in near future?
Well, I think much would depend how they conduct themselves. If they really take care of, if they do not go after their opponents in the way that, they did last time, and if they really conduct in a way which brings about greater cohesion and unity amongst the Afghans, I think that would be rewarded by the international community. But the international community is very closely watching their commitments and their words, their statements are matched with their performance and with their policies. So I think that would be very important for the Afghan leadership to ensure that they really conduct themselves in a way which harmonizes with what the world expects of any country, and especially a country which is under close scrutiny.
Now, fighting between Afghanistan's resistance forces and the Taliban fighters is reportedly raging on in various regions of Panjshir, Parwan and Baghlan provinces. Can the unrest spread to more provinces, and whether the Taliban are able to contain this?
Well, I think they will be able to overcome the resistance eventually, although I think in Panjshir they are having very serious opposition. And the Tajiks, a certain group amongst Tajiks is very much opposed to them, which is under, the former Ahmed Masood's party. So I think there will be resistance from there, but ultimately they will have to, it will be overcome. And what I feel is, what is important is that they should seek a political solution to all these problems. They should work for a political inclusion of all these groups rather than use your military force alone in order to overwhelm them and to subjugate them. Because you can't treat your own people as subjects. You have to treat them as equals, and you do not give them an opportunity to express a different viewpoint and so on. So I think all these things would matter eventually for the peace and stability of Afghanistan.
Lieutenant General retired Masood, thank you for joining Indus News. Moving on, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has warned that Afghanistan could descend into another civil war if the West fails to engage with the Taliban. In an interview, Qureshi said the withdrawal was irresponsible as the West did not listen to Pakistan's concerns about ending the war. He said the initial statements from the Taliban have been encouraging and in its group's interest to act responsibly. Qureshi expressed hope that the group will work towards creating an inclusive government in Afghanistan. He went on to say that Pakistan already hosts nearly 4 million refugees and can't afford another major crisis on its borders. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the U.S. military intervention in Afghanistan achieved nothing but tragedy and loss of life on all sides. Addressing a local ceremony, he said the Afghanistan war has shown it is impossible to foist foreign values on other nations. Putin added that the U.S. approach towards Afghanistan has been deeply flawed. Last week, the president said Russia will not interfere in Afghanistan and that Moscow had learned from the Soviet occupation of the country. The European Union says Afghanistan's scenario shows that the bloc must strive for greater strategic and decision-making autonomy. EU Council President Charles Michel says the bloc must take action to be better prepared for military evacuations if and when needed. Earlier Policy Chief Joseph Borrell also decried that EU and the US were united in Afghanistan, but withdrawal timing and nature were set in Washington. In an article, Borrell said the evacuation from Afghanistan is a wake-up call for Brussels and that it must build its own strategic abilities. He said the Europeans found themselves depending on American decisions in Afghanistan. He noted that a more strategically autonomous and military capable EU would be better able to address the challenges. The policy chief said the events in Afghanistan should lead to deepening the Atlantic alliance. Germany has called on Iran to resume nuclear talks with 6 world powers as soon as possible to revive a 2015 nuclear deal. In a news briefing, a foreign ministry spokesperson said that Berlin is ready to resume talks, but the window will not be open indefinitely. This comes as Iran's new foreign minister said Tehran will not accept protraction in the negotiations. Hossein Amir-Abdollahian said Tehran is not skipping the negotiation table, but Washington must speak respectfully to Iran. He said it will take 2 to 3 months before the new administration in Iran settles down and starts planning. The 7th round of the talks was halted for the presidential elections and the subsequent change of administration in Iran. The Arab coalition says it has intercepted 3 explosive-laden drones in Yemeni airspace launched by the Houthi rebels. The coalition spokesperson, General Turki al-Maliki, said Houthis are deliberately targeting populated areas and civilian infrastructure. This comes just a day after 8 people were injured when a drone targeting the Abha International Airport was intercepted. Earlier, Pakistan and the U.S. condemned the strike on Abha Airport. In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said these attacks endanger Saudis as well as 70,000 U.S. citizens residing in the country. Blinken called on the Houthis to uphold the ceasefire agreement and engage in peace negotiations. Israeli forces have martyred another Palestinian in the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah. Witnesses say the occupation troops opened fire at 39-year-old Riyad Jadallah and left him to bleed to death. They said the Palestinian laborer was crossing military-controlled area when the soldiers opened fire. This is the third such Palestinian fatality of the hands of Israeli forces in less than a week. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Israeli forces attacked anti-blockade protesters, wounding 3 with live bullets. Palestinian media said troops fired live rounds and high-velocity gas bombs at protesters near the border fence. It says dozens of them suffered the effects of tear gas inhalation, in addition to cuts and bruises. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back after the break. South Korea says the U.S. is working closely with it to bring North Korea back to dialogue table. The country's nuclear envoy, No Kyu-duk, made the remarks after meeting with the American counterpart in Washington. No said the U.S. remains firmly committed to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula through diplomacy. He said Washington maintains a forward-looking, creative and flexible stance towards restarting the dialogue. Earlier, the White House said the U.S. is open to dialogue anywhere and anytime without preconditions. Last week, the two sides also discussed possible humanitarian assistance for the North to bring it back to talks. Ukraine has called its defense agreement with the U.S. as a new stage in their bilateral cooperation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made these remarks in a tweet while on his visit to the U.S. He hailed the U.S. support for the Ukraine's territorial integrity, gaining NATO membership, and opposition to Russian aggression. Earlier, the two sides signed the agreement in the field of research, development, testing, and evaluation of weapons. Washington has also promised Kyiv up to $60 million in military aid to counter Moscow's military aggression. Zelensky is scheduled to meet President Joe Biden at the White House today. The World Health Organization says it is monitoring a new coronavirus variant known as Mu. The health body says the variant has mutations that indicate a risk of resistance to vaccines. More in this report.
With a slower vaccine pace in developing and underdeveloped countries, controlling the pandemic has already been difficult. While the new variants complicate the efforts, the World Health Body has classified Mu, which was first identified in Colombia in January, a variant of interest, saying it has the potential properties of immune escape. Meanwhile, globally, the infections tally has exceeded 217 million, with a death toll of over 4.5 million. The U.S. State Department has raised a travel advisory alert for Canada, while Idaho reactivated the National Guard to help hospitals overwhelmed with unvaccinated patients. Brazil, one of the worst-hit ones, has logged over 800 new fatalities and more than 24,000 cases overnight. Brazilian researchers have found that a molecule in the venom of a type of snake inhibited coronavirus reproduction in monkey cells. This is a possible first step towards a drug to combat the virus causing COVID-19.
We were able to see that the peptides not only inhibited the development of the virus in vitro, inside the cell, but we were also able to see here in Sao Carlos that it was able to inhibit one of the proteins that is very important for the development of the virus and the propagation of new viruses.
The European Union has announced to fully vaccinate 70% of all adults across the 27-country bloc. Meanwhile, the French authorities said they aim to administer the third shot of a vaccine to some 18 million people by early 2022. New Zealanders ventured out as tough lockdown measures were eased for most of the country. However, Australia's Victoria state recorded a jump in new local cases, while the lockdown in Melbourne has been extended for another 3 weeks.
And when we hit the 80% double dose number, which we anticipate will be in November, New South Wales looks forward to having our citizens enjoy international travel. And also, New South Wales looks forward to stepping up and welcoming thousands of Australians home.
As cases continue to surge across the Philippines, prison officials said efforts are underway to inoculate thousands of inmates. In Thailand, opposition threatened to intensify street protests fueled by frustration at the government's handling of the virus outbreak.
A consignment of the Russian Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine purchased by Pakistan has arrived in the country. This is the first Sputnik V vaccine consignment to have reached Islamabad. This comes as the virus claimed another 101 lives over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 25,889. The ministry registered over 3,500 new cases with an overnight positivity rate of 6.63%. 7 million people are now fully vaccinated in the country. The U.S. has condemned the Syrian army's assaults on opposition forces in the Dara al-Balad province. In a tweet, the U.S. Embassy in Syria said the attack killed civilians, displaced thousands, and led to food and medicine shortages. Washington called for an immediate ceasefire and unimpeded access for the UN and humanitarian agencies. This comes amid reports that the Syrian army stepped up an offensive against the opposition forces in Dara. In Syria, a three-day truce has been reportedly taken hold in the besieged city of Deira after weeks of intense attacks by pro-government forces on the rebel-held enclave. A halt in the fighting was announced after the Russian general offered a new plan that appeared to meet some of the rebels' demands. The demands include the involvement of the Russian military police in the patrolling the enclave, while allowing the Syrian army presence in the stronghold for the first time. According to reports, Iranian-backed troops that have encircled the urban rebel enclave for the last 2 months would be withdrawn under the deal. The city was the birthplace of peaceful protests against Assad family rule that broke out a decade ago, part of the Arab Spring uprisings. South Korea will give China the remains of 109 more of its soldiers killed in the 1915's Korean War. The remains in 1,226 related realists will be evacuated from the 6 regions in South Korea between 2019 and 2020. China's Veterans Affairs Ministry says a burial ceremony will be held in Liaoning's Shenyang city. China's People's Volunteers fought along with the North Korean army against South Korean and the US-led UN forces in the war. Almost 200,000 Chinese soldiers were confirmed killed in the war, with most buried on the Korean peninsula. In 2014, Seoul pledged to repatriate the remains of fallen soldiers and has since then returned 716. In Peru, at least 29 people have died in a bus accident near the town of Motucana along Central Highway. The police said the bus carrying 63 passengers plunged into abyss in the Andes. The highway where the accident occurred connects the capital Lima to much of the Central Indies. Earlier, a bus carrying mining workers in different parts of the Indies also fell off a cliff and killed 16 on Friday. The two incidents are unrelated, although bus plunges are not uncommon in Peru. The bus plunges are common in the Indies, where the mountain range traverses the length of Peru and highways overlook tall cliffs. The United Nations says more than 2 million people have died in the last 50 years due to climate-related disasters. In its report, the World Meteorological Organization said that over $3.6 trillion in losses have been incurred due to floods and heat waves. The report showed an accelerating trend, with the number of disasters increasing nearly 5-fold from the 1970s to the most recent decade. The report noted that more than 91% of the deaths occurred in the developing countries. In the U.S., the Alamdar fire has forced thousands of people and more to evacuate from California's Sierra Nevada mountain range. High winds threaten to whip up the flames as firefighters try to stop them from reaching the resort of Lake Tahoe. The blaze, burning since mid-August, has charred over 191,000 acres of drought-parched forests so far. More than 6,800 large and small wildfires have burned an estimated 1.7 million acres of forest in California this season. Meanwhile, researchers say the cost of worsening extreme on the U.S. could spike as high as $500 billion by 2050. They say the country could also suffer 59,000 heat deaths annually by that time. It's time for another break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. An elephant in Sri Lanka has given birth to twins for the first time in nearly 80 years. Wildfire authorities say the twins are both males and were born to Sarangi at Pinivela Elephant Orphanage. The facility spokesperson said their father, Pandu, is also an orphanage resident. Sri Lankan elephant experts said twins were last born to a domesticated elephant in the country in 1941. Pinivela was also set up in 1975 to care for wild elephants that needed to be rescued and treated for injuries. It is one of Sri Lanka's biggest tourist attractions. In Peru, people displayed their creativity with recycled material in a mini car contest in Lima. More about the race in this report.
In an unlikely crossover, Dragon Ball's Goku defeated the Flintstones in a crazy car race. The event in Lima's San Miguel municipality saw contestants race in homemade cars built from recycled materials. San Miguel Mayor Jose Guevara lauded the involvement of families, children and parents in the contest.
Families, children and parents show their creativity in this crazy car contest. We saw the winning Dragon Ball car. They were producing smoke. I don't know how they came up with those effects. There was a lot of creativity.
The citizens enthusiastically participated in the event. The overall winners were three friends who built a car inspired by the Dragon Ball animation.
We gave it our souls, our hearts and life, and it's incredible we built this car in a couple of days. And here's the result of the union between three friends.
Second and third place were taken by Flintstones and Fast and Furious themed cars.
In business, the U.S. stocks rose slightly, led by technology shares after the S&P 500 notched a 7-month streak in August. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose more than 0.5% higher at open. The S&P 500 also landed in the positive category, opening more than 0.1% higher, whereas the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite fell close to 0.1% lower at open. Meanwhile, oil prices have fallen before an OPEC Plus meeting at which the producer club is expected to add 400,000 barrels per day each month. Right now, we're taking you live to Islamabad, where the Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi is holding a press briefing with his Dutch counterpart.
And the discussion that we had today were on the evolving situation in Afghanistan. Obviously, Afghanistan is attracting a lot of European foreign ministers to the region, and I hope the interest remains and the international community and the European Union remains involved and connected I thought it was working.
I think you were heard.
They remain connected with Afghanistan because, as I discussed with the Foreign Minister, in my view, abandonment would be dangerous, and nobody will gain from that, and nobody can predict the consequences of that. So I also gave her my assessment of the situation and the assessment of my diplomatic outreach in the neighborhood, the countries that I visited, the 4 countries that I visited recently. I shared their concerns, and I also shared with her their approach and the opportunities they also see. Evacuation is almost done, and we'll facilitate further if we have to on people who want to leave. Now we are looking at the next phase of what kind of a government is formed, how inclusive it is, and how we react to it. I gave her my views, the approach the immediate neighbors and the regional players are adopting. And I'm sure they will make their own assessment, at the appropriate time, how to engage with the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan. I have urged them to remain conscious of humanitarian assistance and not let and prevent an economic collapse in Afghanistan. So on the whole, we've had a very, very good discussion, and there has been a convergence on many issues. Thank you for coming. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you also very much for being here at this late hour. Thank you, Minister Qureshi, again, and your entire team for making space and time for us to have this very substantive and profound and open conversation on the many issues where we are like-minded, where we seek solutions, and of course where we as the Kingdom of the Netherlands are highly appreciative of Pakistan's role and standing as a very important player, particularly in the region. As the Minister rightly referred, our Prime Ministers have also spoken, you and I have spoken on the phone, and we enjoy long-standing ties. We have excellent bilateral and economic relations. But the purpose of this visit is also, of course, to seek ways to further strengthen that, to deepen that, and to reinforce the strong relations that we already have. As the Foreign Minister said, we've spoken at length on Afghanistan, the situation and the implications for the people of Afghanistan, but of course also Pakistan itself. We're very mindful and grateful for the long-standing hosting role that Pakistan has played to a large number of Afghan refugees over the years. And I very much hear your point that whilst everybody is focused now on Afghanistan, the unforeseen, or rather new developments and situation in country and its implications for the region, I'm here also to reinforce a message that we will continue to focus in and on Afghanistan, and this is not a passing by, this is not a fly-by-night visit. We are a long-time contributor, we have been a partner to the development prospects and growth of the people of Afghanistan, and we will continue to do so. We are very mindful and focused on the humanitarian needs. Generally, annually, the Netherlands contributes 50 to 60 million euros to Afghanistan. We will continue to do so through the UN or non-governmental organizations. Equally so, we are cognizant of the fact that the humanitarian needs are growing, particularly at this time and in this stage, and we will talk with our partners. On Friday, the foreign ministers of the European Union will meet to really assess, share our information, our analysis, and hopefully put together a new strategy, not only on how to deal with a possible risk of terror, and obviously continue to build on our counter-terror strategy, to really focus on the humanitarian needs, to ensure that the needs of the people of Afghanistan, women and girls, ethnic minorities, young men and women, that they are met, but also look at ways to achieve a sustainable development agenda, to be present, and of course continue to invest to avert a future migration crisis within which also many people will be desperate to either seek the recourse of traffickers, be smuggled, whilst others will be able to find refuge should they need to do so. There's a lot of focus on the need for closer cooperation, and of course we will explore ways in which we can assist Pakistan in its role as a hosting nation to refugees, but also wanting to invest and make use of the continuing, growing and improving investor climate to attract business to invest in Pakistan itself, to assist job growth, but of course also attract the right investments. On Afghanistan, the Foreign Minister and I agree that an inclusive political agreement would be necessary. It's the best chance for a stable Afghanistan and a sustainable future for all Afghans. But inclusive political requires time, it requires an evolution, and as the Foreign Minister knows, European Union members as well as the Security Council have spoken on conditionality. We need to take this one step at a time, but we need to be focused on the needs of people themselves and be there not only today but tomorrow and for the long journey that lies ahead, I believe. Stability of Afghanistan but also stability of the region is very much dependent on many of the steps we will take, and we look forward to the continued leadership by his Foreign Minister. He has many ideas, I think, in the coming weeks, and we look forward to initiatives also being launched by Pakistan in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Foreign Ministers. I believe we have time only for a couple of questions. Would you kindly introduce yourself while posing a question, gentleman in the black vest?
Thank you. My name is Adil Bashir, representing Rose News. I have a question from Netherlands Foreign Minister. Reports are there almost 700 staff is in Afghanistan, and you had already sent extra Dutch soldiers to have saved 60 Dutch special forces. Your whole staff has been evacuated. This is number one. And the second is, are you ready to provide asylum to Afghans who worked with you as translators if they want to approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there have been different steps taken in order to provide safe passage through evacuations to Afghan staff that have worked with Dutch forces or have a clear connection to the Netherlands, through non-governmental organizations, through support to having been employed by the military mission, such as the translators or others in that type of function, which may have caused them to be in so-called harm's way or be at an increased risk. A high number of people that have qualified in that category, so to speak, have been evacuated, but a number of translators with an employment history to the Netherlands are still on the list, and we continue our efforts to ensure safe passage and onward travel to the Netherlands. Their asylum status will then be assessed through a very quick procedure in the Netherlands. We have protocols for that. Every country organizes this differently, but I think the approach is the same. There's tremendous recognition and a sense of moral obligation towards those that have worked with and for us. We have evacuated all of our local embassy staff. As a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I was their employer, bar one person who chose to stay behind. He wanted to stay in Afghanistan and continue to work in his country, and he's still also looking after the premise of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Now, the embassy, our embassy now, it will be relocated to Doha temporarily, and we are exploring with a number of partner countries the conditions and parameters under which in future we can re-establish our presence in Kabul. This is a temporary relocation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have a question from the right side, the lady in the middle? Please introduce yourself.
My name is Namra. I am from Pakistan Television. First of all, we welcome you, Excellency. My question to you is that how do you see the new situation in Afghanistan and the futuristic way in global terms, that what approach should be taken up? And my second question is that how do you see Pakistan's role in the evacuation process?
The second question is easier to answer. We have tremendous admiration, respect, and I'd like to reiterate our gratitude for the role Pakistan has played and continues to play. Even tonight, a number of our local translators or Afghan translators who've worked with us are being relocated to the Netherlands. So the work is ongoing, but not in the same way as, of course, we've seen until the date of the departure of the American forces. Your first question, I think, is the multi-million-dollar question. We're all coming to terms with the new situation, a new political reality with geopolitical consequences. I think a significant evaluation effort will be undertaken by all. NATO allies are starting this process. We will do so as well in the Netherlands, and I know many other countries are discussing, are using the data, are asking themselves, did we use the intelligence information we had in the right way? Did we have the right understanding of developments in Afghanistan? Have we been talking to the right people? These are normal, regular questions, but it requires a profound, well-led, detailed process where we look at all angles before, to be honest, I will be willing to venture out a very bold opinion. But that this is an exercise of great importance for future engagement, choices around deployment of missions, military or otherwise, that's very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have a question from the gentleman at the back in the middle?
My name is Abbas. I'm from Bol News. I would like to ask Her Excellency that the delegation from Netherlands has recently had a meeting with Afghan Taliban in Doha. What was the outcome? And from our Foreign Minister, Mr. Shah Mehmood Qureshi, I would like to ask that what is the outcome of formation of a new government in Afghanistan? What is the current status of that formation of new government in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Believe you me, I have not been part of the negotiations. I'm not privy to what's happening, but all what we do know is that the consultation process is almost over. They've done their discussions, and one can expect an announcement anytime. Depends on the leadership when they think it's appropriate. It was decided by them that it will be done once the withdrawal is completed. The withdrawal is complete, so it can come anytime. So we're waiting what shape, what form it takes. My guess is as good as yours.
The gentleman, I believe, Mr. Abbas, if I understood your question correctly, you said on TV you'd heard there had been a meeting with a Taliban representative, with a representative from the Netherlands. This is correct. This is a first meeting at civil servants level, similar to other countries. As you know, Germany has an envoy that has been a regular conduit for operationally focused conversations with the Taliban. Other European countries are exploring similar types of discussions. This was a choice, given the fact that we still would like to see the freedom of movement for a significant number of Dutch nationals or people with a right to our protection, consular protection, and with the right to return to the Netherlands, as well as an ongoing duty of care towards a number of people we would still seek to have travel safely and securely to the Netherlands. The conversation, of course, also is an exploratory one to determine what the Taliban position is beyond perhaps public statements on the right of girls and women to education and work, on the rule of law, on the security conditions in country, and very practically the safety and security conditions concerning Kabul airport. As well as, of course, a quick take on humanitarian conditions.
Thank you. Can we have one last question, maybe, from the gentleman?
This is Zahid Farooq Malik, editor of the Daily Metro Watch. My question is, Shri Shah Mehmood Qureshi साहब, आपने कभी पूछा है अपने काउंटरपार्ट से कि अगर PIA के तैयारे evacuated persons पैसेंजर्स के लिए वो रेगुलर पैसेंजर के लिए फिट कर पाएंगे? Oh wow, that's a loaded one. And I love it. What he's saying is, if Pakistan International Airlines pilots and aircraft are good enough to evacuate the Europeans from Kabul, why aren't they good enough to fly into Europe? That's a good one. Thank you.
I have to confess two things. I understand KLM is no longer flying to Pakistan for quite some time. I'm honestly not an airline expert. I wasn't aware that PIA was not necessarily flying to Europe. So it's an important question to have raised.
But
and you were watching Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi with his Dutch counterpart addressing a press briefing in Islamabad. That's all with the bulletin and the details. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.